good people don't smoke marijuana.
I've known Larry for a long time.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio show. The medical marijuana for you and me. Ah, yeah, the medical marijuana. Whoa, 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 yeah, the medical. It's the medical marijuana show. You will know.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio. This one is for Saturday, the 7th of March, 2020. I'm your host, Larry Love. And we're here every week to bring you a digital history of the fight for medical and adult use of cannabis. And this is our 11th year. And if you need to see some of our old shows, you can look them up. And we look forward to bringing you more information as well. We bring you a little news, a little bit of an interview, and a song. That's our format. So this week, our guest will be former nurse Nikki Lawley. And we're going to talk about traumatic brain injury. Nikki is using cannabis for that affliction, and we're going to talk all about that. But first, as always, I've got some news for you. And in Texas, this is how Texas accidentally decriminalized cannabis. Okay? Differentiating hemp from cannabis causes law enforcement to back away from testing low-level busts. This is written by Chris Roberts and published on March 5th by Cannabis Now magazine. That's cannabisnow.com. Texas might not have the most punitive cannabis laws in the United States, but no place that logs 80,000 misdemeanor arrests a year can claim to be cool or chill, even if the penalty can range from nothing to jail time, depending upon local attitudes. While Texas does have a very limited medical cannabis program, efforts to expand that beyond CBD oil or legalize recreational weed outright have failed, meaning possession of 4 ounces or less or sales of 7 grams or less are still misdemeanor crimes. But so what? Misdemeanor bad laws still on the books are no longer enforceable because the state crime lab is now refusing to waste its time testing tiny scraps of suspected weed for THC. In late January, lawmakers in Austin, the city's most liberal city, announced small-scale marijuana arrests were off after the Department of Public Safety's state crime lab told prosecutors it would take up to a year to see if there was THC in any weed scraps that cops found lying around. Why does it take so long to find out if weed is weed? Well, outside of the testing by private labs, a luxury most governments appear unwilling to indulge, DPS appears to be the only agency able to perform more sophisticated drug tests necessary for low-level busts now that Texas legalized possession of hemp, a legal plant that happens to look and smell exactly like cannabis. So this is happening in many states where they don't have the facilities to test that, if what they're finding on people is hemp or cannabis. Of course, hemp has to be 3% or low, and cannabis, anything over that is considered marijuana or cannabis or THC heavy. So that's what's happened in Texas and some other states. Okay, now let's move on. Here in Oklahoma, not here in Oklahoma, but here in the United States, but Oklahoma mom credits medical cannabis for healing her 7-year-old seizures. And here's this wonderful story.
Durant girl with epilepsy is coming up on a year without seizures. Her mom credits medical marijuana, and that includes THC.
She says that it has healed her 7-year-old. News 12's Meredith McCown joins us live in the studio. Meredith, what led to her trying this?
Danjen, Shelley Dunham says her daughter Marley started having hours-long seizures at 10 months old. She says prescription medication for epilepsy wasn't healing. So when medical marijuana was legalized in Oklahoma, she gave it a shot. Now she says it's saving her daughter's life.
Say no shakies.
No shakies.
That's what Marley Dunham calls the seizures she suffered through her entire life until March. Her mom, Shelley, says the last one was 3.5 hours long, and she had to be flown to a Fort Worth hospital.
The damages that have occurred because of such long seizures are what's hard for Marley.
Seizures brought on by epilepsy. She's 7, but her mom says she has the mental capacity of a 4-year-old because of damage from the seizures. At one point, Shelley says Marley was taking 4 to 5 pharmaceutical medications at once.
She couldn't function. She wanted to lay around. She didn't want to be an active part of any day.
She says nothing was working. So when State Question 788 passed in June 2018 legalizing medical marijuana, she started asking doctors for a license.
For the next year of our life, I was hung up on and told how ridiculous I was for my 7-year-old, asking people to give my 7-year-old marijuana.
She was finally able to get one from doctors in Edmond. Marley's been taking 5-milligram gummies daily for almost a year now. 1 in the morning, 2 throughout the day, and 2 at night. About 20 milligrams in total per day.
My mom gave me them every morning.
Every morning. The CBD kind of counteracts the THC psychoactive effects to kind of keep her from being high, if you will. At our house, we don't use that word. We say medicate. We take our medicine.
Every morning, she wakes up with hand tremors caused by the epilepsy. Once she's had the marijuana, the tremors stop. More importantly, in 2 weeks, it will be a year since she's had a seizure.
I don't know how else to say it. She's living her best life. Like she is, I get to see Marley more. It's about the fact that for the first time in almost 8 years, my daughter has a chance at her life.
Shelley is now the manager of a local dispensary and advocates for medical marijuana after what she's seen in her daughter. But she wants more to be done, like the state government authorizing school nurses to administer medication for kids. In March, she says Marley's doctor will allow her to stop her last seizure medicine. Then she'll only take medical marijuana. Live in the studio, Meredith McCown, News 12.
Getting school nurses to administer cannabis, boy, that's a tough one. They pass laws. They passed one here in New Mexico. They've passed them in Colorado. They've many other states. And there's big problems with that because schools are refusing to allow that to happen, even though it's legal in their particular state. Here in New Mexico, Tisha Brick and some others are fighting to be able to administer, by someone at the school, this cannabis medicine for these children. This last report just shows how it really works for these young children. Why can't they have it at school? I mean, the federal law thing is one, but you know what? State laws supersede federal laws. We're allowed to make our own laws. It's up to the governors and the people in the medical cannabis industry to enforce the laws that are on the books, and not penalize young children from using the medicine that they want to use, or making their parents leave work to come to administer their medicine. So the fight goes on. This next story is about the first medical cannabis dispensary opening in, guess where? Utah. Can you believe that? Utah.
For the first time ever, legal medical cannabis is available in Utah as the first of the state's 14 dispensaries opened for business. The operators of Dragonfly Wellness gave us a tour before the first patients arrived. From growing fields and a processing facility in Moroni to the pharmacy that opened Monday at 711 South State Street in Salt Lake City, Dragonfly Wellness is the first company to make medical marijuana a reality in Utah.
To be able to be here, to be able to stand behind the counter and be able to serve patients, it's a dream come true for everybody that's a part of the staff, because people have been waiting for this day their entire life.
Wade Laughter is Dragonfly's patient educator and a patient himself who uses cannabis to treat his glaucoma.
I don't think you understand how profoundly beautiful it is to someone like myself. I feel grateful and at a loss for words.
Hannah Popper says she's a sexual assault survivor who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder and used to be crippled by daily panic attacks.
So now I use cannabis to release my trauma, clear my head, and be mentally present. Cannabis has improved my quality of life and has given me the confidence to be the brave survivor I am today.
Now, Popper and all patients who obtain a card from a qualified physician can now purchase and use cannabis without worrying about breaking the law.
Whether it's meeting some shady guy in a back alley that you need to go get some medicine from, or having to drive countless hours back and forth between Colorado and Nevada and doing those trips just so you can provide medicine for your family. So for those families, this is for them because they no longer have to do that anymore.
Dragonfly Wellness is open daily from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you do need a medical cannabis card and a prescription to purchase products that range from $15 to $95. You'll also need currency because, at least for now, it's a cash-only business.
Utah, everybody. That's certainly a progress for the medical cannabis industry. Okay, so many people have trouble sleeping. Cannabis, I've been using cannabis for years to sleep, and Dr. Jacob Miguel Vigil at the University of New Mexico is doing studies down there, and I pulled a little clip. We've had him on before, and he's talked about his studies with PTSD and some other stuff. And here's a couple of, about 4 minutes of him talking about how to improve your sleep using cannabis. Dr. Jacob Vigil.
But when it comes to cannabis, unfortunately, this is just another example of where our government has entirely failed us in providing objective information on how common and commercially available cannabis-based products ultimately affect our sleep quality. Now, there has been a number of studies conducted, unfortunately, using synthetic analogs oftentimes or extracts, so not really the types of products that the majority of our citizens are actually experimenting with. But what these studies do show is that these products tend to reduce the latency to which time individuals fall asleep, so it helps you get to sleep a little bit quicker, and it could also reduce the agitation that can sometimes occur during REM stages of sleep. Of course, this general lack of information on how the most popular and widely used types of products actually affect sleep quality didn't sit too well with researchers at the Medical Cannabis Research Fund. So we decided to conduct the largest scale study of the real-time effects of medical cannabis use on symptom intensity levels having to do with insomnia. We partnered with our friends at the Relief app, and by doing so, we were able to capture how insomnia intensity levels are ultimately affected by cannabis consumption by measuring these intensity levels prior to and following consumption. So essentially able to measure changes in real time, as well as the vast array of potential negative side effects and all different types of side effects that can accompany cannabis use. What we found is that on average, people reported an insomnia-related symptom intensity reduction of roughly 4.5 points on a 10-point scale. Now obviously, when translated into application, this is quite positive news for many people. Another interesting aspect of this study is that we also found that CBD seems to be a primary statistical predictor of insomnia-related symptom intensity reductions. Now, this is in stark contrast to many of our other findings working with other conditions that tend to highlight THC as a primary predictor of symptom intensity reductions. So, for example, with regard to conditions related to pain, anxiety, and depression, THC seems to be more predictive of therapeutic potential, but in this case, CBD seems to be very effective at improving sleep quality. Now, I can tell you in my work with other types of patients, so for example, in my studies measuring post-traumatic stress disorder among veterans, that patients oftentimes report a reduction in the amount of agitation and the sheer number of nightmares that they experience at night, which brings up another really important point, in that in addition to any potential properties that cannabis has on sleep quality directly, that it appears to improve the majority of users' sleep quality indirectly. That is, by alleviating or relieving the types of symptoms that oftentimes impair sleep quality. So for conditions that have to do with pain or agitation, again, cannabis appears to be particularly effective, and by relieving those types of sensations, those aversive sensations, cannabis ultimately appears to improve sleep quality for the majority of users. So what can we learn from this information? Well, for one, medical cannabis appears to be effective for improving sleep quality for the majority of users. Second, CBD appears to be particularly important as a therapeutic player in alleviating symptoms related to insomnia. Now, our other work has also shown that THC is particularly effective at alleviating other types of symptoms that can impair sleep quality. So, for example, pain and anxiety. So, both phytocannabinoids are probably important for improving sleep quality, but just through different mechanisms. Now, if you're one of the tens of millions of people that are trying to improve their sleep quality and really struggling with whether or not to experiment with medical cannabis for that purpose, it might be something you want to consider.
Okay, so again, that was Dr. Jacob Vigil from the University of New Mexico. In legalization, of course, law enforcement is still very concerned about impaired driving or driving under the influence of cannabis. The definition of what is impaired is certainly up in the air, and there's no way to prove it. But in California and some other states, they have taken some steps to protect, I guess, cannabis users, because they have now ruled in California that the smell of cannabis does not justify a full legal search of your car. So here is Keith Stroup, or Stroup, I'm not sure how he pronounces that, from Normal, talking on a radio show in California just a couple of days ago about this particular ruling, which is going to be beneficial around the United States as well.
From the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, known as Normal, Legal Director Keith Stroup. Keith, appreciate your being with us. You think the court got it right this time, I assume?
Well, I do, and indeed there are at least 4 other states who have, within the last few months, reached a similar decision. Let me make a minor correction, Larry, if I could.
Yes.
It wasn't the Superior Court that threw out the search. It was your Court of Appeals.
Excuse me, originally went through this. Yes, you're right. It was the appellate court.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. But again, as I say, people need to keep in mind that the general rule, because of the Fourth Amendment that protects us against unreasonable search and seizures, the police either have to have a valid search warrant before they search, or the search has to fit in a handful of well-recognized judicial exceptions. And one of those exceptions for almost 100 years has been if the police believe they smell marijuana or any other illegal substance they could identify when they pull a car over, then the courts have allowed them to search the passenger compartment of the car without a search warrant. They generally cannot search the trunk without a search warrant, or they cannot search a locked container that may be in the passenger compartment. But the search of the passenger compartment they've allowed on the basis that the evidence may be destroyed if they're not allowed to search it in short order. Now, that may have made judicial sense back when anytime you smell marijuana, it was a crime. Marijuana was illegal for all purposes and in all amounts. But as you know, there are now 33 states that have legalized medical marijuana. There are 11 states and the District of Columbia that have legalized marijuana for all adults for recreational purposes. There's no way when a police officer pulls your car over and smells marijuana that he can tell whether you have less than the 1 or 2 ounces you're allowed to have under your state law, or whether you have more than that amount, in which case it would become contraband and they would have the basis to search. So since they cannot tell, this no longer fits within the recognized judicial exception to the requirement for a search warrant.
Now, with alcohol, it's a legal substance. It's legal, but it's illegal to drive under the influence of it or to have an open container in the passenger compartment of the vehicle. And would you see that the law, do you think it should treat booze and cannabis the same, or do you think that there are differences that should come into play here?
Well, if there's evidence that the driver of the car is smoking while he's driving, then he's committing a crime, even under California's legalized marijuana law. And that's true in the other states that have legalized as well. But simply the smell of marijuana does not suggest that he was smoking in the car. It simply may be that he had the allowable amount of marijuana in the car, or has had in the last few days. And as a result, the officer smells marijuana. Let me point out one other problem with the policy as it existed prior to this decision. Law enforcement officers have been trained for decades now that when you pull a car over, if you think the driver or the passengers look suspicious, then you always claim you smell marijuana, because it allows you to search the passenger compartment to see if they're up to no good, even though they may have been made up the part about smelling marijuana. I'm not suggesting most police lie, but there certainly are plenty of police who do lie about the smell of marijuana so they don't have to go get a search warrant. They can just search the car on the spot. So in an important way, what these decisions are doing is returning a bit of a right to privacy that we used to possess that we lost over the last few decades. So I think these decisions are terribly important. And over the next decade or 2 decades, I suspect that every state in the country that has legalized marijuana, either for medical use or for recreational use, will reach a similar decision. Right now, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Colorado have all reached decisions similar to the one your Court of Appeals just handed down.
So the question obviously is, what is impairment? Okay, there's been studies and that have shown that people actually drive more carefully under the influence of cannabis. But how do you prove impairment if he gets stopped? Are they going to give you like a alcohol drug test where you have to do the alphabet backwards? I mean, I can't even do the alphabet backwards when I'm straight. But, what is impairment? So I've told this story before, and for the sake of new listeners, I'm going to tell it again, so pardon me for my regulars. A few years ago, I was having my blood tested, just regularly for my yearly thing, cholesterol, sugar, all that stuff. And so I decided I wanted to see what my levels of THC were. So the night before, and before midnight, so I would have about 12 hours of no consumption, I smoked a couple of joints. I took a 50 milligram capsule, and then the next day I was scheduled to go have my blood tested. So around 12 hours later, I drove myself, to the drug lab, the testing lab, and had my blood tested. I had no problem driving. It was 12 hours later. As a matter of fact, I felt very, very straight. The report came back, and of course it took a while for it to come back because they actually had to send my blood to Utah to a testing lab because the labs here in New Mexico were unable to test for THC at that time. I'm not even sure if they still can do that. So when my test came back, I looked to see what my THC levels were. And of course, as many of you know, and maybe some of you don't know, the arbitrary level that has been set by many, many states of what they are considering driving under the influence of cannabis is 5 nanograms of THC per milliliter of blood. That's 5, okay? So my testing came back 12 hours later, not being impaired, almost 100 times that limit that they say is driving under the influence and being impaired. And that was 499 milligrams of 99 nanograms of THC per milligram of my blood. So that was actually, again, 100 times over the limit. They need to figure out how to do this. Right now, I think that anybody driving under the influence, if you're pulled over, it's probably going to get thrown out because there's no way of proving that you were under the influence and impaired. Okay, we'll be right back with Nikki Lawley, former nurse, and she's going to talk to us about how she uses cannabis for traumatic brain injury. Be right back after this.
It's all about the 420 MMJ Radio. The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana radio. Radio show.
This is Alan Messenger, formerly of Vito and the Salutations, now in the cannabis industry. You are listening to Medical Marijuana Radio.
And we're back. And online from New York State today, I have Nikki Lawley. Nikki Lawley is a pediatric nurse by trade and a cannabis patient as well. On her bio, it says that Nikki Lawley is a cannabis advocate and educator, and that traumatic brain injury stole her joy, but cannabis returned it. Welcome to Medical Marijuana Radio, Nikki.
Thanks so much, Larry.
So, basically, what are you doing now to educate people in the medical industry? Because they don't learn the endocannabinoid system in medical school. So tell me what you're doing.
Well, Larry, I've just begun my journey of really understanding the plant myself. I am in no means an expert cannabis person, but I'm a patient. And I can honestly tell you from the perspective of role reversal, going patient versus being a nurse, things are quite dramatically different. I learned what chronic pain was. I learned what chronic health issues were. Until you actually live it, you don't really understand it. The plant gave me life when I really had none. I was breathing and alive and a shell of a human, and cannabis gave me hope when I had none. Traumatic brain injury is a really unique journey unless you've actually experienced one. It's kind of hard to truly understand it. But I can tell you that day my life changed in a second. I was restraining a child for a vaccine, a routine vaccine. My coworker needed some assistance, and in a split second, he ended up headbutting me, and I had like a whiplash type motion, thrown into a wall and back into his head again. So it was a dramatic impact that should have knocked me out. Then maybe it would have been taken more seriously. One of the challenges with traumatic brain injury is that it's an invisible disability. People don't see it, so they think you're fine. Because sometimes, you have good moments. That doesn't mean how you don't have any idea what is behind the scenes for what it takes that person to get where they are.
Sure. A lot of people seem to be suffering from TBI, which is the short designation for traumatic brain injury. So what was your perception of cannabis before that? Were you, being in the medical profession, did you have your own views before you started using it yourself?
I did, and I was a recreational user, not like I do now. Now I use medical cannabis every day. Unfortunately, in New York State, we don't have full flower, full plant medicine. So we're forced into a whole different realm of products that really aren't as effective as if you just actually got the flower from the actual plant.
So what are they What are they selling in New York? Pods or something that you have to vaporize? Or?
Correct. They just released the flower pods from Curaleaf, but in Buffalo, New York, we don't have access to that. So, but they really aren't full flower. I mean, I guess they're flower, but it seems like a total joke. New York State is very anti-smoking, so it's a huge challenge to go up against. I've gone to the legislator. I've participated in various lobbying efforts to try and just bring awareness from a, conservative person's point of view that has completely 360'd. I was always accepting of cannabis, but it wasn't like something I had to do every day or strove to do every day. It was just more of a relaxing kind of chill out thing. So that day in Las Vegas, about 3 months after my injury, I went on vacation. My husband just tried to, put me in a better place. So Vegas is one of my favorite places. So it made sense to take a vacation there. It was an absolute agony, horrible flight trip. I was just miserable. And I was literally kind of contemplating killing myself. It was a very dark period of my life. And it was really kind of crazy because usually when I stay in Vegas, I stay in a hotel room that, faces the Bellagio fountains, has a, terrace for going outside. When we got to the Cosmopolitan, I literally said, I don't care what room you have. I don't care if I'm looking at a broom closet. Just get me a room. I was just absolutely miserable. So my husband was like, you're ruining our vacation. You've got to cheer up. You've got to snap out of this. And so I go out on the terrace and, one of those billboards goes driving by on the strip and it says, get your cannabis card here today and go to a dispensary this afternoon. And so I was like, yeah, right, whatever. And then it goes by again. And if you know anything about Las Vegas Boulevard, I mean, it's like an insanely busy street. So to actually see this sign twice and to be in a suite that I normally would not be in, it was kind of like a sign, I guess you could say.
That sign.
So,
that sign was a sign for you, for sure. So what? So you went down, you got your card, and
I got my card, and then it kind of was a crapshoot because I didn't have any idea of what I was looking for, what I was doing. I relied on a bud tender who obviously was not a medical professional, but he said, here, have some heavy indica strains because if you're in pain and you're, miserable, this will knock you out. Well, I didn't need to be knocked out. I actually needed to be functioning. So this actually particular strain of cannabis was not a good choice for me, but through the learning process and trial and error and, education from others that have really inspired my journey to help educate others because the lack of knowledge, I shouldn't have had to get to a point of suicide before I discovered cannabis.
Exactly.
It was never talked about by any physician.
So let me ask you this, okay?
Sure.
We know now from science and studies that have been going on for years that cannabis actually rebuilds brain cells. It causes neurogenesis. And it might well be the next Alzheimer's drug and cognitive impairment drug and so forth. So so tell me the difference for you if you've tried like edibles as opposed to smoking it. I mean, obviously smoking it, you get a relief and an effect right away where edibles take some time. But are you using different forms of cannabis to help your TBI?
Larry, I kind of have a really unique situation. I do not metabolize anything that's fat soluble due to weight loss surgery and no gallbladder.
I understand.
So basically, edibles do not work at all for me. Anything that has to go through first phase digestion is absolutely not effective. So unfortunately, I must smoke my medicine. And again, I didn't think there was anything to medical edibles. Like I just was like, I could eat 500 milligrams of THC and not feel a thing.
Wow.
That's pretty abnormal.
Well, it absolutely is. Let me ask you this. Have you tried suppositories?
I actually have not. That is
Okay.
not a journey I have ventured down, but I hear that is
certainly a
potential.
That's certainly a way of ingesting, and also I'm hearing that you can, put some drops of cannabis oil. Not a, I don't, probably a tincture as well, but like canna oil that they make cannabis capsules with and so forth, you can put some in your belly button, because that is an entrance to the whole body. I mean, obviously, it has receptors all throughout the body and so forth. So that's another thing that you could probably try. So do you have to medicate using smoke, obviously, because you as in particular cannot digest cannabis well. So do you have to imbibe several times a day? And obviously, depending upon what strain you're using, there might be, the life of your relief, and then you have to start smoking again. So how do you titrate?
Well, I'm in kind of a crazy market, so we don't have access to flower here in New York State. So I actually am a patient of New York State, but I am forced into the illicit market to find flower in this state. So what actually happens is, instead of doing that and violating the law and breaking the law, I end up going to Canada. I'm 15 minutes from the Canadian border, and cannabis is legal in the whole country.
Right.
So I bring so I have become more educated in Canada than I have in this country, in this state. So I know a lot more of the licensed producers and the lingo and the things about the Canadian cannabis industry, because that's where I'm forced to kind of hang out. Luckily, I have a lot of supportive friends that allow me to come medicate for a weekend, but then I have to come back to the state completely unmedicated and without medicine. That's challenges in itself, because I deal with the border, and it's a crazy PTSD kind of experience when you have to get pulled over for secondary and you're wondering, oh my God, did that roach just get blown back into the car?
Right.
Or whatever. It's a true horrific feeling. And so being forced out of country to get cannabis that I can't bring home is a whole different animal. So what I've found is limonene and pinene are my terpenes that really help me with my TBI, for me personally. What works for me will not work potentially for another person. So I'm not giving medical advice from a nursing perspective, just my own personal experience.
Right. So from a nursing perspective, though, I don't know how long you were in the profession, but are you surprised at all about how many different situations cannabis medically can help? Does that surprise you?
It's shocking to me.
Yeah, it really is.
From cancer to pain relief to, honestly, yes, it's shocking.
So,
and, networking with the Cannabis Nurses Association and the various medical organizations that, quote, profess to be the cannabis experts, I follow a lot of them, and understanding who's legit and who's full of shit is kind of a challenge, especially when you're dealing with someone with a brain injury.
Sure.
A lot of people want to hear my story, and, I share as much as I possibly can with my journey. It's really kind of a different one. It's really hard to encompass in 20 minutes the whole hell that I've gone through the last 3.5 years. But it's really been a positive in my life. Through the plant, I've met some amazing people and heard so many journeys of other patients and been able to empathize and really sort of be grateful for my brain injury. I know that sounds kind of stupid, but I would have never met these humans. I never would have had a whole different perspective on chronic pain. And, we all kind of look funny maybe at the guy that pulls into the handicapped parking space and he goes running into the store. We don't know what it took him to get there. But many people are judging him just because he's running into the store. And again, I don't know the situation, but I really have tried to be more empathetic and less judgmental and more kind, I guess, is the biggest message. Having your sanity questioned, and if you're really a true brain injury survivor and basically told, oh, it's your anxiety and depression causing your headaches, I didn't have those things before my brain injury.
I understand.
I had them a little bit, not that to the degree that I have now.
Sure.
My
Let me
frontal
ask.
lobe got baked.
I hear you. Let me ask you. Did you have a problem with like friends and family members? Because of reefer madness, there's still a lot of people out there that don't understand that cannabis is really okay for the body, so did you have to like talk to your family and some friends to say, listen, I'm using this, or did they look at you in a bad way when you first got started with it?
Well, Larry, my father is retired U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. So reefer madness at its finest was in full swing when I suggested that I was using medical cannabis.
Wow.
And immediately it was like, well, you have a license for that, and it's federally illegal, and the whole negative connotations that come with using the plant. It was a whole big episode to try it, but now my father totally sees the difference in me and the quality of life in me. My daughter got married this past August, and my parents were obviously there, and he was amazed at how well I was constantly medicating, but I was able to interact with other people in a very confusing, busy type setting. And if it wasn't for the plant, I can tell you right now, I would have been up in my room just crying and not functioning.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's saved my life. I can truly say that.
So, have you ever tried drinking raw cannabis juice, or is that because you can't? Can you digest that? Can you digest like a smoothie or wheatgrass or whatever you get at the health food store? Is that digestible to you?
So, as a result of my brain injury, my immune system is really jacked up. So, I'm virtually allergic to so many things, including what I've discovered, like surface kind of dermatitis, when I handle too much of the plant. I get very high B and very itchy. And so I'm very hesitant to eat many things.
I understand.
Especially now because of my hyperimmune response.
Sure. So you're really an anomaly a little bit, different than a lot
Yeah.
of other. Look, everyone's body is different, and everyone that tries cannabis, the same cannabis can react differently between people. One person can actually get stimulated by an indica, and another person, an indica is for sleep, and and so forth. So there's sort of an opposite effect for a lot of people. So that, and obviously you are an anomaly that fits right into that category because you're specifically have to deal with some different underlying conditions and so forth. But TBI, traumatic brain injury, is something that a lot of people have. I mean, football players, baseball players. I mean, they get shook, and that's causing some problems in later life. So, since you are a TBI patient, and that you have some experience with it, if someone has a new TBI, traumatic brain injury, what do you suggest? How do they get started? Let's say they've never had cannabis before. How would you tell someone in your condition, but maybe not as drawn out as yours, to get started with cannabis for TBI in a smoking way? Because that's obviously where you're at.
Yeah, because I have to smoke.
Right.
I actually share my journey with a lot of people, and I share the differences between the different types of plants. So the online community, the New York medical cannabis community, that's kind of where I would send someone, depending on what state they're in, depending on what conditions they have. There's so many great support groups in the Facebook platform. Yes, they do shut them down, so that does kind of suck. But most of mine, luckily, have continued to go on. And, sharing, like, Annette Davis has an amazing page. It's all about the plants.
Absolutely.
And
we had her on a few weeks ago. She is amazing.
Oh, she's an amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. I've learned so much just from her page. And so I've created Nikki in the plant, and I'm just trying to figure out social media. I'm in no way, shape, or form an expert. Just trying to manage just getting my story out because a lot of people are very interested in the, girl with the brain injury, the nurse with the brain injury. Truly. So I don't have a specific way of, in general, recommending something quickly, but I would highly recommend someone reads about terpenes and the entourage effect and the synergies between the minor cannabinoids that can really help with traumatic brain injury. One thing I can tell you for sure, my third traumatic brain injury was my game changer. That was the one at work. I've had 3 since then. And I can tell you since I've had cannabis on board, despite the last 3 being really significant, blacked out, etc., I recovered from them much quicker than I ever have to, this is my new baseline.
Right. Well,
3 years later.
Your endocannabinoid system has been activated after years of it of prohibition, where people's endocannabinoid systems weren't activated, and we didn't even know we had an endocannabinoid system. So, everything is changing very fast, and it's very exciting to hear about this stuff. So you're in New York, and obviously, you talked about the problems with the New York medical program, and I know that Governor Cuomo is trying to legalize recreationally now as well, and he has sort of been against cannabis for a long, long time in what I've been seeing. So do you know specifically, are there a lot of people signed up in the medical cannabis industry? Do you think that recreational cannabis adult use is going to hurt the medical industry or help it expand?
Well, what I've seen in other states that have legalized are the medical program, cannabis use goes up, but the medical programs tend to go by the wayside because they kind of lose their purpose or benefit, which is wrong. It shouldn't be that way, but I see it as a big problem, especially with the older Americans. They really could use some of that hand-holding and assistance when choosing cannabis. So I see it as a huge stumbling block to take away that educational medical component, but yet I'm only one person here in Buffalo, New York. So, I fight for change, but I don't know what impact I can actually have, basically. I have written to Cuomo, I've written to all of my legislators, and, we do have people on our side fighting for it, but, the whole THC caps and the whole we can't have smokable flower, it just doesn't make sense. And I have, medical providers literally telling me that if I'm smoking cannabis, I'm not getting any medicational benefit, that I'm just getting high.
Who would say
and
that?
I challenged him. The leading neurologist in Western New York that is the cannabis expert in the area.
It doesn't sound like it to me. I mean, that's just...
Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible. My appointment last week was just horrible. Shocking.
That person doesn't know a lot about cannabis.
Oh.
I mean, there's studies out there that actually show that smoking cannabis does not cause lung cancer. It actually improves lung function and lung volume. It doesn't, and there's just, they're denying the science, or they're not reading it and comprehending it. I mean, that's really quite egregious for a medical professional in the cannabis industry to tell you something like that. Now, truth of the matter is, I mean, if you are the THC that goes up in smoke is wasted medicine, so to speak. When you're ingesting a smokable cannabis, you are losing some of the medical benefits because you're not getting all that THC. There's better ways of taking it. We know that. Do you think? What's your feeling in watching the New York program? Do you think that it will get better? Are there going to be protections in it for medical? I mean, we tried to here in New Mexico legalize for adult use the last 2 years, and they're trying to do it in a way that will protect the medical programs here. But like you just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, programs in Washington State and Oregon and other places California have suffered horribly and disappeared. And the end users of medical are different than the end users of adult use. We need medical products. We need inhalers. We need suppositories. There's all kinds of medical. We need edibles for people that can take edibles. We need edibles that are more than 100 milligrams in a serving because of people's different. It's different for adults. Adult use. If they want to regulate adult use and tell you you can only have a 10 milligram piece of candy, I understand that a little bit. But that 10 milligrams, someone might have to eat a whole candy bar to help a medical problem. So it's so different. So we need people like you and me and other people that are fighting for medical cannabis and adult use. I want adult use to happen. I've been waiting 50 years for adult use. But we have to protect medical because we wouldn't have adult use in any state right now if it wasn't for the proliferation and the understanding and the science behind medical cannabis, that it doesn't kill you and it actually really helps a lot of situations. Anything else that you'd like to talk about today in regards to your journey in this cannabis world of health?
I just would encourage people to not give up. It takes some experimenting. It takes, being willing to try different, like you said, methods of ingestion, abilities of, everybody's got different tolerances. So I just really recommend go low and slow and learn from your body, and just do what makes you feel good. Don't overdo it and just go low and slow.
Well, Nikki Lawley, 2 cents. That's a lot of other people's 2 cents too. That's really the way to go, because if you are new to cannabis, whether it's medical or recreational, and you have a bad experience the first time, you'll never go back to it. So
never.
Low and slow is definitely the way. How can people get in touch with you if they would like to contact you and get some information about TBI and your story?
Sure. I have a Facebook page, Nikki and the Plant. Also, Nikki Lawley 1@gmail.com is my email. And I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So feel free to reach out on social media anyway.
So, Nikki Lawley, thank you. Great. I wish you the best of luck. TBI is something that many, many people suffer from, and the fact that you're out there and you're doing well personally with it, and you're telling other people that it might be a good thing for them, I think is fantastic. So keep advocating and educating, and we appreciate your time today, Nikki.
Great. Thanks, Larry.
My pleasure. We'll be right back after this.
I know you don't know what I'm going through. Standing here looking at you. Well, let me tell you that it hurts so bad. It makes me feel so sad. It makes me hurt so bad to see you again. Like needles and pins, people say you've been making out okay. She's in love, don't stand in her way. Well, let me tell you that it hurts so bad. It makes me feel so sad. It's gonna hurt so bad if you walk away. Why don't you stay and let me make it up to you? I'll do anything you want me to. You love me before, please love me again. I can't let you go back to him. Don't go, please don't go. Come back, it hurts so bad. Don't make it hurt
Well, I want to thank Nikki Lawley for taking the time to tell us about her journey dealing with traumatic brain injury and cannabis. That's TBI. Just a little note, you know, we're in the middle of this coronavirus thing, and people in the cannabis industry, they share bongs and joints and pens. Maybe until this is sussed out, we should just smoke and imbibe by ourselves and stay away from people. Everyone knows I've been doing elbows for about 25 years, and I think it's important just to try to stay safe until they figure out what's going on. I also want to thank my two radio mentors, both the initials HS. Thank you for your inspiration. If you want to be on the show, if you have a product to sell, a story to tell, you're an advocate, a patient, write me at info@mmjradio.com. If you'd like to hear some of our old shows, you can go to mmjradio.com, medicalmarijuanaradio.com. My YouTube channel is S11E08. SoundCloud and Spreaker, we're MMJ Radio. CannabisTube.net, we're MMJ Radio. On Now TV, channel 937. Coming soon, theCannaChannel.com. Stay safe, everybody.
Shalom. Peace. Shalom.
Oh, yeah. Stay safe and fuck Dr. Trump.